All right, welcome everyone to the Node.js Diagnostics Working Group monthly meeting. It is July 13th. Everybody has filled in their names on the attendee list. On our agenda today, I will just call out, and if anyone wants to add or subtract, I think we should start with async wrap. If there's questions about that or things to discuss, because we missed it last time. We have Matthew Loring and Ali from Google. They're going to talk about the trace controller they've been working on. I put down inspector protocol. Maybe we can discuss, get an update on where that's at, and then if we can discuss if the APM summit that was brought up. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Okay, so we'll start with async wrap. I guess, Trevor, I'll turn it over to you.
I was mainly here to answer any questions if anybody has anything. The EP is there. What is there has been accepted. I'm still working on the public API. There are little ruts that make it painful, but it's coming along, and we'll begin to implement those in pieces. There's one major change that needs to be made to the internals of it so that it can support multiple, so somebody can have their own unique set of hooks instead of all hooking into the same giant thing. And yep, that's that. I hopefully we'll be getting some testing feedback and see where it is before V6 goes LTS. And we'll have proper support for all node internals. Last I heard from Jeremiah, the state of getting promised support is not promising.
So I saw that on the issue. Do you have more details on that?
No, I don't. Jeremiah is in Germany right now, so we're like at complete opposite time zones. I'm gonna, as soon as he jumps on today, I'm going to see what's going on.
Okay, yeah, please keep me in the loop as well.
I will. Thank you.
You mentioned a strategy for implementing native add-on integration with async wrap. Could you explain a bit about that?
Okay, well, honestly, the big issue is the fact that there are internals and headers that it would be easy if I could just say, okay, async wrap is exposed, everybody can use it, but can't do that. So what I'm doing is making like an async wrap for users class, which doesn't have reference. Like basically, what it does is instead of referencing the environment variable, it references isolate, and then it'll extract it for you and then pass that along to the native implementation for you. So it can still trigger all the appropriate events, and also hook itself into, like, it will essentially function internally like an async wrap instance, but the users will be able to require it and then inherit from it.
So does this mean that we need to deprecate the make callback function that exists now?
Yeah, eventually. Still, yeah. I'm trying to see if there's like a loose way. Like, I've been brainstorming on a loose way to still allow that, because make callback does some important things if you don't care about, like, if you're just calling back, but like you have a domain, right? So like calling back in C++ with your own domain, for example, you'd still have to set up. There's still some mechanics that would have to be set up for you. So basically, the node make callback would just be like calling the JavaScript, but it knows nothing about the asynchronous state. as such, it wouldn't, it automatically not run like the next tick queue, because it would assume that you're already in an execution state, and that the next tick queue would be run for you automatically after it's done running. So yeah, so some minor things like that. So basically, we'll just cut out a bunch of code from it, but leave it there.
So Ben was complaining a bit about the duplicating code or duplicated code between the make callback function and the make callback method in async wrap. So it sounds like that won't really be solved by this implementation.
Yeah, well, it should be. I mean, there will be a teeny bit of duplicated code, still having the node make callback, but like the amount of code will be much smaller. Like all the hook calls into pre and post, or and those things. Also, the duplicated code calling the next queue, all that will be removed. So it's basically like, just off the top of my head, it's like set up domain if there is one, call the callback, tear down domain. And then I think there's something to do with how error handling would work in that case, because it will work slightly differently, since it will assume it can be caught. Like, it will assume that there's already a JavaScript stack on top of it. But yeah, 75% of the code will be removed.
Okay, that sounds good. So am I correct in assuming that you will be able to change the NaN implementation such that we use this async wrap class such that the deprecation of the make callback function won't be as big as an issue?
Well, okay, so like that, since now that I'm not super familiar with how NaN is structured internally, but does it create its own class, or
I'm
does
not
it just
so familiar with it, but it has this NaN callback wrapper which prevents garbage
gotcha.
collection. So that will sort of be our init hook in async wrap, and then this wrapper object has a call method, and that will sort of be our pre and post hook, I assume, and then eventually you will destroy this wrapper, which then be of course our destroy hook.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess similarly, we're working on the ABI stable API, so we'll have to figure out how it would interact with that as well.
Yeah. I'm not quite sure how it would affect the ABI part, since there is no stable ABI. Well, except for, an indefinite.
I just mean we're currently working on that under the API working group. We actually have something that runs like all the NaN examples, and we're implementing some larger modules now. So it's like, that sounds like something that we've got to factor into how you would support it through that, that API as well.
Yeah, to me, like, I'll brainstorm that too, but to be completely honest, I'm not sure that's feasible. It has to. Some of the things it does is completely based on the life cycle of the class, which is why you inherit from it. And unless you can get it to like magically inherit from the NaN API, then I don't see how that'd be possible.
Yeah, I don't. To be honest, I don't have enough insight to be able to say on that side of the. Certainly, like things like object wrap, we managed to accommodate.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I mean, I'm not saying it can't be done. I just can't think of a way to do it. But again, similarly, I don't have a lot of experience with NaN, so could easily be missing something.
So Trevor and Andreas, the issue number 29 in the diagnostics repo, is that up to date right now? Is that a yes?
I'm
29.
on a very slow computer, and I'll have to check what issue that is.
I put it.
29.
Yeah. You opened it, Andreas, but a long time ago.
How do you do it on the ball with that?
It's the async wrap overview issue with the big to-do list.
Yeah, I was
Okay.
going to say,
Yes.
can we
Thank
update
you.
that?
That should be up to date.
Okay.
I mean, it's not up to date with regard to the enhancement proposal, so I guess we should add a tick on that. We need to implement the API there. But,
Yeah,
besides
looking
that,
at this,
fine.
I think everything that has been checked has been discussed. The process.binding thing, well, it's going to hopefully will be moving public, so I'm going to be an issue supporting multiple hooks. That is in the EP, timers and next tick. That's in the EP, promises, microtest queue. Discussion is ongoing. And then the add-on module integration, that is, I'm still finishing up that part of the EP. So, yeah, that's, and that, yeah, it looks up to date. Well, everything looks up to date.
Do we need to put in the stuff that you guys just talked about, like how this will affect NAN and the ABI stable API, or make callback? Should that be listed here?
I think we'll put that in a specific issue. If we need to update code in NAND, then we'll probably put a tick in there. But
Okay, so are we good on that? Do we move on?
Well, since this is the Diagnostics working group, I was wondering if there was anything like that seemed all development related. Is there anything specific to diagnostics and anything perhaps that people have questions? Cool.
Okay, so next up, we'll turn it over to Matt, I guess, or Ali, whatever you want to do. You guys are going to talk about the tracing.
Sure. Yes. So good. Is this better?
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah. So there have been some exciting developments with tracing. I want to say up front, a lot of the engineering work for this has been done by Raymond, who's here with us as well, also on our team. So the tracing controller work that was outlined in the issue that I think I saw linked in the minutes has some components that will live in V8 and some components that will live in Node. So there is now a pull request open that I can link to in the minutes that has the V8 component of this. So that consists of a mechanism for aggregating traces, filtering traces based on categories, and also all of the interfaces that will allow Node to specialize how traces are collected, add custom serialization formats so they can be outputted in whatever mechanism is most desired. I can link down here. So I put the link to the pull request for that in the minutes. We also have implemented node-specific subclass of the V8 components as a prototype in Node, and we're able to use it to collect traces both generated by V8 as well as we can insert some trace points. We have inserted some trace points in the file system module for now just to kind of see how this would look. And if kind of time permitting at the end, I can show what one of these profiles looks like. But that mechanism, the node side of this is kind of still something we're prototyping and playing around with. And the V8 one is looking a little bit more solid, and its current state is captured in that linked pull request. So I was hoping also if anybody had kind of questions about this as we're going through as we're going through the design of this, if there are questions or anything, we'd be happy to talk about it.
Will there be an interface for modules, either native modules or JS modules?
I think that would be up to, like, I mean, that could be a follow-on, and I think it would be something that the community could decide on how to best expose it to the Node ecosystem. I think the goal we have right now is to make sure we have enough features. We have basic trace functionality in V8 available, and that is subclassable by embedders, and that we have a basic sort of buffer trace controller and buffering mechanism available in Node, so that Node core can get traces. Now, how to expose it to user space is a follow-on, and that will probably require some design work. I think that's something that the community would be better to take forward and run with.
Currently, there are a set of macros provided by V8 that we're using to populate traces in the tracing controller, but these could be, yeah, there could be additional APIs for use by either native modules or some kind of exposing it to JS in some way.
Okay,
Matt,
so
maybe do a demo, since you said that. I mean, I think we have time.
sure.
Yeah, sure. One moment, I'll present here. Hopefully this will all just kind of work. So are you able to see my screen right now? So this is just a small HTTP server. It's going to read a file whenever it gets hit. So we ran this and put some load on it, and it emits a profile that's consumable by the Chrome About Tracing tab. And you'll get a view that looks something kind of like this. So you can see so this is something that we wrote the serialization for this by extending the interfaces provided by V8. It could be extended similarly for other formats. But what you have here, so we can zoom in here. We can see at startup, right when the benchmark starts, we have V8 compiling all the scripts. We can zoom in on one of these. We have some compile events. It's parsing a script and compiling it. And then we see there's some downtime between. Let's see here. So there's some downtime between the initial compilation and when we start putting load on the server, and we see the node event loop is sitting idle there with no CPU usage. And then we can come in here to the kind of the bulk of it. You see, let's come back here for a bit. So first you see a few of these red tick marks dipping down below the purple line. These correspond to GC scavenge events, so you can see like kind of the frequency and the time taken by GC. And additionally, if we kind of zoom in around this area, so we see that interleaved among the main event loop execution, there are a few of these file system operations. You can get information on how long specific ones took by clicking in. And also you can highlight over a region of this graph to get, let's see here, so I can highlight over kind of something in here, and it'll give me a breakdown in the bottom here of which trace events were kind of taking how much time, and you can drill down into this to get more information about the specific events.
Yeah, so note that, I mean, for prototyping, we just added trace points to file system, Node.fs. I think we need more trace points in Node. Right now, this is just a prototype.
What information is the trace? Does it just provide timestamp, or does it provide any more context from where it was emitted from?
Well, it has a timestamp. I think it also has CPU time in it, and I think depending on the type of trace point you have, there's lots of types. There's ones for synchronous events, others for asynchronous events, and you can add additional metadata along with the trace points too. It's up to you. It's up to you how you want to use the trace points. So if you look at the set of macros that are available for trace event, there are lots of different things you can represent. So it could capture like a fair amount of data as per the need.
So currently the trace event format is fixed, and it's the one that's used by Chrome and V8. But there's as follow-on to the pull requests that I currently linked in the minutes. There's ongoing work to allow for arbitrary arguments to be provided along with traces. So the initial this initial PR will only include kind of the thread ID of the logging that logged the trace. Some CPU and timestamp information, some other kind of standard data, but there will be a follow-on work to allow for arbitrary arguments to be passed.
Where do we output? Is there a default output file, or can that be configured?
Yes. So serialization, there's a trace writer interface. You can Node will be able to write specializations of the trace writer interface to output in whatever format to whatever file. Yeah, that's all. There's a general interface, and we've implemented one specific instance of this to output the Chrome consumable format to a file called node trace log or something like that. But that's completely yeah, that's configurable.
Cool. So you're saying gonna write to that and change it.
Sorry, I think you cut out.
By default, you will write to that log, but you're saying the interface we could implement to do something different.
Yeah, so this is all we're still working on. Like the ergonomics of how this will integrate with Node is kind of not part of the initial work. So if if you want to provide a command line flag that will specify what file this writes out to, all that can be done on top of this.
Okay. Any other questions or comments on this? Okay. Any other questions or comments on this? Okay. Any other questions or comments on this? Yeah, I also just muted it. Hello? Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So are we good on that? Any further discussion that we want to have now on the tracing controller? I guess the timeline. When do you guys think we can start experimenting with Node?
So I mean, the first step is the CL in V8 has to land, and then there's so Raymond here has been working on a prototype that generates this. I mean, there's some more work there, and when it's ready, I think we can start by opening up a request on the Node side.
Yeah, the one thing that we need to keep, so on the timeline, these changes are just landing in V8 now, and there's going to be lead time before V8, so this will probably land in V8 5.4, hopefully, and so there's going to be lead time before that gets picked up by Node. So we'll continue working on the Node prototype, but it will have to be on a branch of Node that has V8 5.4 in order to integrate with V8.
Okay, so I guess we're ready to move to the next topic. So the next topic I put on is inspector. Thinking here about what we might want to talk about on that. So I have, I wanted to talk about the thing I proposed for a quick minute. So in, I think it's in Node, regular Node. Let me find the issue number. 1 second. $73.93. I'll paste it in. Essentially, what I wanted to bring up is that the way Inspector is set up right now, there's like 3 layers, and they're pretty tightly coupled. So there's the agent, which loads up a backend, which is actually composed of the protocol gateway and then the actual dispatchers to V8. And so what I was really saying in 7393 is, can we separate those layers a little bit more? So for example, can the agent, instead of loading up V8 inspector, can it load up some sort of inspector interface so that there could be alternate backends in the future? And I also propose, and this one is probably less important, but separating that protocol gateway, which is generic, from the dispatchers to V8, which is, of course, mapping from the incoming protocol to what V8 expects. So that's really a secondary thing. Like, we could have that protocol gateway be a little more generic and shared. Anyways, yeah.
I think this is a good discussion. I think we would need Pavel for this discussion. He wasn't able to join today, so I know he was still catching up on his email after being on vacation. But I think we would need his insight on this one. I don't have answers for this at the moment.
Okay, that's cool. Does I mean, I'm just wondering what other people think of that, or is it just me and Pavel and Ali, us, that have been looking at that? Okay, so the other thing I was going to ask about on Inspector is, I know, Ali, one of the things is that we need a CLI debugger for Inspector for that protocol. I think there's been a couple other things I've noticed in threads of tasks that Node can do, or enhancements that we might want to pursue after things are stable. Could we start building a list of those kinds of things? Do you have other things, Ali?
So the way I've been tracking the list of things to do is through the V8 inspector tag on the issues.
Okay.
I think there's one issue that is not open at this point. I think it was mentioned in one of the threads, but there's no separate issue that was open for it, which was sort of integrating the console. So I think that, but apart from that, I think the tag has been the thing I use.
Okay, so any other discussion about Inspector? Anything else people want to discuss? All right, well, the last thing that's officially on our agenda is the APM Summit. So I am not actually going to be at Node Summit, unfortunately. So I will leave that up to, I don't know, Thomas, was it you that started that thread?
Yes, it was. I can briefly say that I unfortunately haven't heard back from Charles, who I was in contact with to figure out if we could get a room there to hold it in. And yeah, so also I thought I was going as well, and apparently it turns out I'm not going to Node Summit. Something came up, unfortunately. So actually, I want to put out a question. If I don't know how. So first of all, how many people here would be attending Node Summit at all?
Yeah, I am.
There's 3 people in this
Two.
room that would be as well, at least 3.
3, 4, 5. Okay, yeah. So I saw somebody else write on the issue. It's issue number. What does it say here? 58. I heard somebody say as well that they could not make it. So how many people are? So the question is, should we postpone it, or I mean, or should we have it there?
I mean, if you cannot make it and Stephen Belanger cannot make it, I mean that would be quite some key people, I think, that should be there as well. So I think it's more important to get more representation in order to make concrete progress.
So I've taken a look at what node-related conferences that are international are coming up besides Node Summit, and I can see the 2 Node.js Interactive, the Europe one and the North American one, and then there is the NodeConf EU as well. That's kind of like the only ones that I think are big enough to attract all the key people. So the question is if I should do a doodle and basically put in the dates that are possible, and then people can tick off when they can, and then we can find the time where most people can attend.
Makes sense to me.
Okay. I don't know if people who are interested in this, of course, have read the issue, or otherwise I could just briefly go over the reason for this, but if I don't want to just jab on about something that people already know.
I don't think it hurts if you want to give a quick summary. We've got a few minutes.
So basically, it all started at NodeConf Adventure, where we had a session about tracing and APM, application performance management, and we kind of came to the conclusion that it's really hard to do in Node, and there was a lot of the key APM vendors at NodeConf Adventure. So we had a really good talk about how we're all solving basically the same thing over and over again. So first off, it might be a good idea to basically share some things. Second off, maybe some of this could make its way into Node, maybe not, but that's the discussion that needs to be had. So that was basically the idea of the APM Summit. It kind of akin to the there was an error summit as well earlier this year, I think it was. So it was kind of in that spirit that we wanted to make it. So yeah, that's a very brief overview. And the people who were there was basically Abneta, myself from Upbeat. There were who were the others? There was I think Node Source were there as well, and there was, I forgot his name. There was a guy from New Relic as well. He was not working on the agent, but he wanted to ping the right people at New Relic as well. And he was participating in the discussion also. So yeah.
Is it mainly about
Sorry?
trace, Thomas? Is it mainly about collecting traces? Is that what you said? Or other things?
Well, yeah. So I think it's traces on another level than we've been talking about so far at this meeting. It's more application level traces, usually related to, but not only HTTP requests and the database request and I/O request that goes on during an HTTP request. So basically, what you get from New Relic, for example. But also it's sometimes you want to instrument your own code. You have some kind of long-running function that you want to instrument. So you might put a start trace, end trace around that function or stuff like that. Manual traces, so to speak. So it's a more high-level tracing than the stuff that we usually talk about. But it's a big problem for APM vendors to get the right hooks into Node. And today, what you need to do to figure out how long does an HTTP request take, which database queries occur during this HTTP request, etc. You need to do a lot of really, really ugly monkey patching. And we, of course, are looking into all the nice stuff that async wrap is adding to this, giving us here, which will help some of it, but not all of it. Also, there is a big issue right now related to the ES modules, where the way that we make this work is that we basically monkey patch the _load function on the module to basically hook into all the modules that are being loaded and inject our own code, our own tracing logic into those modules. It sounds really awful, and it kind of is. But of course, we can't do that with ES6 modules because it's not possible to modify the imported modules in ES6. So that is also an issue that we need to discuss. And I know a lot of really smart people are already discussing this. It's not gone unnoticed, luckily. So did that answer the questions there were, or?
Yeah, that was helpful for me. Matt and Ali, does the tracing controller, would that, if we were able to do a user side implementation so that we could be used from within modules, would that be a good place to start for this, or do you think that's the wrong place to start?
There are slightly different concerns. So the problem that Thomas was talking about is more related to application level understanding. And it has to do a little bit with tracking of context across asynchronous flows. So sure, the trace points could be ultimately the trace points that we're working on with trace event could be ultimately the source of information that APM vendors could use, but that's not really the problem. The problem really is how do you track asynchronous nesting and how do you track asynchronous context? Correct me if I'm wrong, Thomas.
Yeah, that's totally right. It's a big issue figuring out keeping a context across async boundaries. So to basically figure out deep inside some call stack 7 async jumps from the request came in, which request was actually responsible for making this database query. It's because if an error occurs, you want to attach, for example, that request, that URL to the error when you log the error, for example. And it's really, really interesting. I didn't know that the stuff you guys were working on was actually that could be used in production. Is that possible, or does it have too big of an overhead, or?
So right now, it's okay. The answer is yes. That's the idea. It should be cheap enough that you could enable it in production. I mean, it depends on how many events. I mean, right now it's designed for performance analysis. It's not designed for. So it's designed for when you are actually going to go investigate a performance issue. but it depends on the number of events you're actually going to be tracing. So if you're tracing every V8 execute, that happens millions of times a second, and if you're going to trace that, that's going to have a cost. So it depends on the type of thing you're interested in tracing. So I look at this like trace event style tracing as a slightly different kind of a beast, which has different type of information. Think of it as structural profiling. Whereas the APM style tracing is more about I'm going to take a sample of some of your HTTP requests, and for these HTTP requests, I'm going to tell you all the RPCs that happened as during this HTTP request. So so it's possible that you could use trace event data for the latter as well. But I mean, they're coming at the problem from two different perspectives. One is like very high level, the other one is as low level as it gets.
And isn't another key aspect is that the APM case has to deal with the non-instrumented code as well. Like, you can't assume that the trace points are there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, over time, you would imagine that the gap will diminish, right? So for example, V8 already has trace points. The APM tracers are not interested in those trace points today because that's too much detail. But down the road, you would imagine the node would have some trace points. So we could say, oh yeah, I started an fs.read here and I finished here. That may be something that APM vendor could be interested in, or there may be other things that the APM vendors are interested in. And maybe further down the road, maybe more people would add in the ecosystem would add trace points. So I mean, it depends on. So I think over time the gap will reduce between these two use cases, but at the moment there are different sides. And yeah, APM today cares about uninstrumented code.
What we have talked about is if it would make sense to make some kind of generic protocol that, let's say you're a database vendor and you have a node driver that you maintain, it would make sense for you to build into that this generic APM tracing protocol, so you know that you work out of the box with all the major APM vendors. So maybe there. So we already talked kind of down that road. So maybe this would kind of be the protocol we could use. I don't know. I don't know much about the protocol, so I'm just guessing here. But it would be awesome if we could all use the same one, of course.
You mentioned that async wrap doesn't really solve the issue completely. Could you explain what's sort of lagging? Is it too low level, or what is it?
Well, it solves the issue about all the. I mean, if let's just imagine that we get the promise process.next take and the promises and all that stuff as well. Then it solves all the core stuff that goes inside that goes on inside Node. But for example, the Postgres, the PG module, for example, have an internal callback queue that does not, because it maintains a connection pool, of course, to the database. So when you make a query, your callback is actually queued in an array, and it just shoots your query down the socket to on one of the open sockets. And when it gets back a result from the database, it just looks in the callback queue and see, oh, which callback should I call based on this result that I got back. And that callback queue is of course initialized right when you make the first query. So it's still in that context. So you can't know which request was actually responsible for calling that callback. So there are the edge cases like that, for example, and there's also stuff that's not related to async stuff. For example, the ES module stuff.
Yeah, so ultimately the problem is async wrap. The purpose of async wrap is to give you insights into async flow within Node core, and the problem is so we are trying to track context, and context can be broken by any user space library that takes a callback, puts it in a queue, and then calls it later under a different context. And that's basically the problem that async wrap is not designed to solve. I mean, domains sort of solved it in the past if they weren't poorly designed. So yeah, so that's ultimately the problem, that the notion of the logical context. That concept is there in .NET, for example. I think C# has this concept of a logical call context. That's what we're trying to propagate, and user space libraries can break it very easily, and you still need to monkey patch user space libraries to propagate context on connection tools and around other queues.
Yeah,
So,
I mean,
sorry.
I agree that it's an issue, but I think in the long term, we eventually want async wrap to solve these issues such native add-ons does not break the context. However, how we're going to do that is not really clear. I mean, hopefully the async wrap class that Trevor talked about will be enough, but I mean, there will always be modules that does not behave nicely. So yeah, those will be an issue, but hopefully we can solve them.
Note that it's not just native modules, and I can write JavaScript modules that break async context.
You should file an issue so we can solve it.
Oh yeah,
it shouldn't break.
Yeah. So this is, I mean, so I don't know if people are familiar with the zones proposal. That was an attempt to solve this problem, yeah, so it's a hard problem to solve.
Yeah, I've made a doodle that I will send out. I will actually just add it, post it a comment on the issue. I don't know if there is. I don't want to cut off the discussion or anything, but I don't know if there's any more questions, anything like that, that we need to discuss here on the call. But maybe one question I can ask is, how many or are people comfortable coming to Europe for this, or does it need to be a US-based thing?
I expect it will be dependent on the people and companies involved.
Okay, because I mean there is the next thing that goes on in the United States. It's not until November. That's Node.js Interactive North America. That is on the 29th and the 30th of November. So it's at the end of November, actually.
That's a long time from now, but I have a feeling you've got a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
I think it might be worth sort of proposing one of the other sort of European conferences and seeing if people are able to make it, and if not, then yeah, then we can postpone it. I think I mean, this is an important issue for the ecosystem and for the overall completeness of, I mean, diagnostic tooling for Node.js. So it would be good if people, if different API vendors could come to the same page on how to trace Node.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'd suggest Node Interactive Europe.
I'll put that on the doodle. So far I have, and please let me know if I've missed something here, but I have Node.js Interactive Europe in September. Then I have NodeConf EU in October. And then I have Node.js Interactive in November. Are there any other events I should put on there? Doesn't seem like it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to suggest either the day before or the day after is each of these events. It is one day okay? Yeah.
I think in NodeConf EU there's already a summit for some other topics.
Yeah. No, that's a Node.js Interactive. There is the collaboration summit. At least.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, there is. That's the two following days. after the conference. I've been thinking a lot about that, and I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. If people are going to be there because of that, or if people want to go to both, and then of course have to choose, and we're going to be a conflict.
Yeah, no, that's hard to judge if it's the same group or not.
Yeah.
And certainly,
Well,
I'm certainly signing up for the other one as well. So.
We'll see what the doodle gives us. I'll make a note of it so people know that it's a choice for one or the other if we put it at the Node.js Interactive Europe. At least if we put it after. I've heard that it's a bad idea to put it the day before Node.js Interactive Europe because apparently it's not possible to get into the venue the day before. Of course, we could do it some place totally different, but there's something about being a holiday in Amsterdam or something the day before that means that hotels are extremely expensive and stuff like that. So that's why the day before probably is not so good.
All right. Well, why don't we'll take it back to that doodle, and we can figure it out from there.
Yeah. I think that I had like one more thing, but I forgot about that. Yeah, I can write a comment about that as I remember.
Okay. Well, we gotta wrap this up here. It's 3 minutes to go. So did this work out okay? Having just the hour before the CTC meeting and the first week of the month. Feedback on that? Well, this is the second week, I know, but. So then our next meeting will be it'll be August 3rd at 12 Pacific. At least that will be the plan. So any other comments or ready to wrap it up? All right. Well, thanks a lot, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your summer.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.